In the heart of a remote African village called Ndemu, there was a man everyone called Mad Ochieng. His real name was Ochieng Omondi, but because of his strange behavior, talking to himself, laughing for no reason, and always making wild predictions, people believed he had lost his mind. For years, Ochieng lived on the outskirts of the village, surviving on scraps and odd jobs. Children ran away from him, and elders shook their heads whenever they saw him. But Ochieng was not as mad as they thought. He had a secret, a dream that no one believed in. The mysterious discovery one. Fateful night, as Ochieng wandered near the river, he noticed something unusual. Under the moonlight, the ground sparkled. He bent down, dug with his bare hands, and found a strange black stone. It was heavy, smooth, and unlike anything he had seen before. Gold? No. This is something else, he whispered to himself. Determined to find out what it was, he walked for days to the nearest city, where a merchant examined the stone. The merchant's eyes widened in shock. This is a rare mineral used in making powerful machines. People will pay millions for this, the merchant exclaimed. Ochieng, the so-called Madman, had discovered a fortune beneath his village, from rags to riches. Instead of selling the mineral immediately, Ochieng made a bold move. He took samples to foreign investors, who, impressed by the discovery, offered him a partnership instead of a one-time payment. Within months, mining companies flooded Ndemu, and Ochieng became the wealthiest man in the region. He built schools, hospitals, and roads. The same villagers who mocked him now sang his praises. Men who once spat at his feet now bowed in respect. Women who ignored him now batted their eyelashes, hoping to catch his attention. But Ochieng had only one person in mind, Ochieng, the woman he had loved since childhood. Love and betrayal. Ochieng had once been his fiancée, but when he lost everything years ago, she had abandoned him for Juma, the wealthiest man in the village at the time. Juma had mocked Ochieng, calling him a useless lunatic, but now the tables had turned. Ochieng arrived at Juma's house in a convoy of luxury cars. The entire village gathered, whispering in excitement. Juma, now struggling with debt, came out with Ochieng by his side. She was still as beautiful as Ochieng remembered, but there was a sadness in her eyes. Ochieng, my love, I was a fool. Forgive me. Ochieng cried, falling to her knees. Juma scoffed. You think money can buy everything? She's my wife now. Ochieng smiled, pulled out a piece of paper, and handed it to Juma. You're broke, Juma. You took a loan from my company. You have two choices. Repay the debt or give me what I want. Juma's face turned pale. He had no money left. With the entire village watching, he swallowed his pride and stepped aside. Ochieng ran into Ochieng's arms as the crowd erupted in cheers. The return of the king. That night, Ochieng threw the biggest feast the village had ever seen. As he sat beside Ochieng, looking at the stars, he whispered, "They called me mad, but madness led me to my destiny." And so the once madman became the legend of Ndemu, the richest, the most powerful, and the man who won against all odds. The night of celebration stretched until dawn, with drums echoing through Ndemu. But even as Ochieng sat in his grand mansion with Ochieng by his side, a storm brewed in the shadows. Juma was not a man to accept defeat, a betrayal in the dark. 3 nights after the wedding, while the village slept, Juma gathered a group of bitter, jealous men, those who once benefited from his wealth before Ochieng's rise. Among them was Obado, the village chief's corrupt brother, who had lost his position when Ochieng funded new leadership. We were kings, Juma growled, slamming a gourd of palm wine onto the wooden table. Now we bow to a man who was once a beggar. Are we going to sit and watch him take everything from us? Obado smirked. Number. We will remind him that power is not just about money, it is about fear. That night, the men planned their revenge. The night of fire and blood. At midnight, Ochieng awoke to the sound of screams. Flames devoured his mansion, and armed men stormed his property. He grabbed Ochieng's hand and rushed outside, only to be met with the sharp edge of a machete against his throat. Juma stepped forward, his face twisted with hatred. "You thought money could protect you?" he sneered. "You are still just a madman playing king." The villagers gathered in fear, watching as the once mighty Ochieng was dragged to the center of the square. Ochieng fought back, biting one of the men, but they struck her down. Blood trickled from her forehead. Ochieng roared in rage. Juma raised his machete. "Tonight, we erase your name from history." But just as he swung the blade, years passed, and Ndemu transformed into a kingdom of gold and steel. Ochieng, once a madman, was now the most powerful ruler in the land. His wealth was unmatched, his enemies had been crushed, and his influence stretched beyond borders. But he was no longer the man he used to be. He had become a king with no heart. The laughter that once made people call him mad had vanished. His eyes, once full of fire, had turned cold. He trusted no one. Not his guards, not his advisors, not even the elders of the village. He ruled with an iron fist, rewarding loyalty with gold and punishing betrayal with death. But power has a price, and his past was coming for him. A woman in the shadows. One night, as Ochieng sat in his golden palace, a hooded figure slipped past the guards. She moved like a ghost, silent and swift, leaving no trace behind. She entered the throne room, where Ochieng sat alone, staring into the fire. A whisper filled the air. "Did you miss me?" Ochieng's body went rigid. The voice. It was her. He turned slowly, and there she stood, Ochieng. Her face was no longer soft and innocent. Her eyes burned with something dangerous, something he had never seen before. She had changed. She was no longer the woman who wept when he exiled her. She was reborn in the fire of vengeance. Ochieng's voice was calm, but his grip on his golden staff tightened. "You have returned," Ochieng smirked. "I warned you, Ochieng, you made a mistake." He studied her, his heart beating slowly, steadily. "I spared your life," he said. "That was mercy." Ochieng took a step closer. "No, Ochieng, that was cowardice. You feared the truth. You feared that I was never your enemy." Ochieng's eyes darkened. "Then why did you meet with Juma?" Ochieng laughed, a cruel, broken sound. "Because I was trying to save you," she shouted. "Juma had powerful allies. He told me they were planning to kill you and I wanted to warn you. But instead, you listened to that snake Dio." Ochieng's breath caught. Dio, his most trusted friend, the one who had told him Ochieng was a traitor. Something cold slithered through his chest. "No," he whispered. "You're lying." Ochieng smiled bitterly. "Am I?" She reached into her robes and threw a letter onto the floor. It was old and torn, but Ochieng recognized the seal. It was from Juma. The words made his blood run cold. "Dio, the fool trusts you. Keep feeding him lies. Once the woman is gone, he will have no heart left. And when he is weak, we strike." The world tilted around Ochieng. He had been played. Dio, his closest friend, had betrayed him. The rage inside him boiled, hotter than the sun. "Where is he?" Ochieng roared, his voice shaking the walls. Ochieng smirked. "That's the best part, my king." She leaned in close, her breath warm against his ear. "He is already dead." The death of a traitor, Ochieng stormed into the great hall, his guards rushing behind him. There, in the center of the room, Dio's body lay on the floor, lifeless, cold. A single knife was buried in his chest. His eyes were wide open, frozen in terror. Ochieng turned to Ochieng, who stood in the doorway watching. "You killed him?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She tilted her head. "No." Ochieng's fists clenched. "Then who?" Ochieng smiled, her eyes gleaming like a predator. "The same people Dio was working with. The ones who wanted you dead." She paused. "The ones who are coming for you next." Ochieng's breath slowed. The walls of his palace, once unbreakable, now felt like a cage. His kingdom was not safe. His enemies were still out there, and the war had just begun. The return of the Mad King. Ochieng did not sleep that night. He stood at the highest tower of his palace, staring out into the vast lands he ruled. He had built an empire with gold, blood, and fire. But he had made a mistake. He had let love blind him. He had trusted the wrong people. And now, the hunters were coming. Slowly, a grin spread across his face. A grin that had not been seen in years. A grin that once made people fear him. The madness had returned, and this time, the world would burn. Let them come, he whispered to the night. Let them try. Because the Mad King of Ndemu was back, and this time he would show no mercy.